Okay, up to this point we've talked about the different ways that we know something. And the emphasis, of course, for this class is going to be on the research method. So what we have to learn now is how to formulate research questions that can be answered through the research way of knowing. And there's a systematic process for this, and it takes a little practice, but this is kind of a fun part because we learn to be able to start putting the pieces together to be able to see the bigger picture. Now remember, social work research is a systematic and objective inquiry that utilizes the research method to solve human problems and creates new knowledge that is generally applicable to the social work profession. Now that's kind of a fancy way of saying that we want to use research methods to be able to generate knowledge about our clients and our communities and our agencies so that it's going to be credible. There are basically 4 purposes for social work research. The first purpose is what's considered exploration, and this is when the researcher is examining a new interest. The subject of study is relatively new or understudied or needs a different approach. Generally, if it's an exploratory or an exploration, this is usually done from a qualitative standpoint, where you interview people in depth, you get a lot of information, and from that you start refining this information. An example of what potentially could be in an exploratory stage at this point is maybe some of the cyberbullying with the technology and the advancements in technology. This is relatively a new area that could be looked at. The next level, which is descriptive, comes more into what we know or what you guys are going to think of as the scientific way, and this is the quantitative way where you apply some numbers to the things that you learn. And this is where the researcher observes and then describes what is observed. The observation is careful, it's specific, it's deliberate, not random, and it's more accurate and precise than just causal descriptions. The next level, which is explanation. Researchers have an explanatory purpose if they wish to know why battered women repeatedly return to live with their batterers. They don't want to just describe how often they do or how they do it. They want to know why they do it. And the level of explanation actually requires an even more rigorous type of study. And rigorous meaning a lot more controls in there. We rarely get to the level of true explanation in social work research for a variety of methodological reasons. But this is the level where we can actually say with some confidence and some credibility that A caused B or A influences B. Evaluation is a 4th purpose of social work research, and it's to evaluate social policies, programs, and interventions. And if you remember, we've already talked about the different type of evaluations, and they basically follow the same rules, and it can be exploration, description, explanation. Usually evaluation will fall into at least the description level and maybe the explanation level. But the evaluative purpose of social work research encompasses all 3 of those procedures, and it's to evaluate something specific: our program, our practice, our social policies. This is just the definition that the author gives in the book in terms of exploration: when the researcher is examining a new interest, when the subject of study is relatively new or understudied, or unstudied or understudied, and when a researcher seeks to test the feasibility of undertaking a more careful study. So the exploration really is at a qualitative level, and it's used to gain an understanding of some phenomenon, and then it's also used to build future research. And again, description, when something is observed and described. Oftentimes we do this with our surveys, client satisfaction, something is observed and it is described, and so this is a descriptive level, and you can have a descriptive correlational level where you can actually describe some correlations and some variables. And then explanation, which is really the highest level in the continuum of knowledge from a research standpoint, and that's when we need to know why something happens rather than just describing it. We need to, with some credibility, to be able to say A causes B, so then we can provide an intervention to deter A and improve B. And this is the highest level in terms of research knowledge continuum in being able to say that. And we rarely get to that level, but we get close. And then of course evaluation, which actually looks at exploration, description, explanation, but the evaluation, the focus of it is to evaluate a policy, a program, an intervention, but it uses the same techniques and the same methodology that we're going to be learning in terms of creating a study, asking a question, designing a methodology. It's all about the purpose and the focus of what the study is about in terms of whether you choose to do exploration, description, explanation, or a combination of all three. So there's two approaches to research. We have a quantitative approach and we have the qualitative approach. The quantitative approach relies on quantification and collecting and analyzing data. That means it uses numbers to explain or to count human experience, and there's descriptive and inferential statistics analysis that are used. It is often seen as more objective and less subjective. Qualitative is when the data are presented in forms of words, diagrams, drawings, but the focus of a qualitative study is to get the subjective experience. What is the experience of the individual, of that participant? There's some qualitative studies that can be done in terms of analyzing journals, analyzing historical data, so you may not actually be interviewing an individual, but it still captures the meaning of the words. It captures the essence of the words and not just the number of the words or just how many times a certain word is used. So you have quantitative, which generally is seen as more objective, less bias. There's controls that are placed in there to make it more objective, and then it's used, numbers are used to count and describe things. Qualitative is much more subjective. It wants to know the experience. So from a research standpoint, when we talk about the knowledge level continuum, we talk about exploratory being the lowest level of knowledge, that we gain knowledge from an exploratory standpoint. Then we go to descriptive correlational, and then we go to explanatory. And as we develop research studies and as we develop a knowledge continuum, this is the way it works through research. So then how do we formulate a research question? Well, a good research question will ask how to increase the positive, things like empowerment and resiliency, rather than how to decrease the negatives, and this is from a social work standpoint. So when we start wording our research questions, we really want to focus on the strengths and the positives, and we tend not to do this, and so much treatment and so much intervention has come from a medical model, and a medical model is really a deficit model and not a strengths model. But we really have to work hard to be able to use our words and formulate questions and formulate statements from the positive aspect. So a good research questions actually have 4 characteristics: relevance, researchability, feasibility, ethical and cultural acceptability. Relevance. A relevant question is one whose answers will have impact on policies, theories, or practices related to social work perfection. As you develop a question, a research question, you need to be able to answer the so what of it. So what if you gather this information? How is this going to inform social work practice in your agency, in your community, with your clients? We may have a lot of curiosity about a lot of different things, but we need to be able to say, so what? If we go to this trouble, if we put our clients to this trouble to gather this information, so what? How is it going to further what we're doing? Researchability: is the research question appropriate for scientific inquiry, and is it possible to collect valid and reliable data that would be needed to answer the question? Well, you're going to sit there and you're going to say, well, of course it is. Well, in wording your question, you have to be careful and you have to avoid things that are value laden, like if you wanted to explore the question, is abortion immoral? That's not researchable. You can't answer that question. You could answer the question, is there a difference in the perspective of morality between women who of the Catholic faith versus women of Southern Baptist faith in terms of abortion? That would be answerable, but you can't answer the question from a research standpoint, is abortion immoral? Feasibility: could you practically do what you have planned? You may have a grandiose design of really wanting to capture information, but can you really do it? Is it feasible? This is where you have to get down and do what the authors are talking about, sieving or sifting through the process. You have to get down to something that's going to be feasible to be answered in terms of population, your sample, how many you can get to participate, how much money you have, how much time you have, and all of these things. So these are some compromises that happen. You create the most perfect study that you could possibly create, but then you have to start taking little pieces of it off as it gets down to feasibility. So your question is the same way. You have to work to get your question down to, is it feasible to be answered with something, with the way you've planned to do it. So then we get to the literature review, and this is an essential early step in refining your research question and rewriting your research proposal. You've observed a problem, you observed something you're curious about in life, in your agency, with your clients, and you have a question about it. But what you really have to know is, what do we already know about that topic? What do we already know about that population? Maybe your question has already been answered and you're just not aware of the answer. So you have to get into the published literature. You have to get into studies that have been published about your topic, about your population. So as you do this, then this helps you refine how to ask your question that you're wanting to research, how to ask it about your population, because you're going to know what's already been asked, what's already been answered, what's not been answered, and it's going to help you to look at your population and make it specific to that. So the purposes of doing the literature review: it does help us to understand the relationship between a research question and the body of existing knowledge. Those two need to connect. You can't sit in a vacuum with no knowledge and just look at your population and come up with a research question. You have to know more. It helps us understand why the research question, why it's a problem, and it identifies gaps in the knowledge. But when you do this, when you do a literature review and you identify gaps in the knowledge, which is part of a literature review, you need to be careful in claiming that there are gaps in knowledge when a thorough search of the literature has not been done. And what this means is, you may pick a topic and your topic may have several subtopics, and so you only pull one or two studies on the subtopics. Well, that's not a thorough search of the literature, so you can't with credence say we don't know this about this topic because you only pull two research studies. So this is a careful balance when you begin to look at a topic and begin to look at a literature review, and narrowing it down enough so that you can have an expertise in the knowledge that's out there about that specific topic, and then with some credibility you can say, these are the gaps, this is what we are seeing in the literature in terms of we don't know yet. Doing the literature review also helps to avoid reinventing the wheel. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Oftentimes the things that you're curious about have been studied and may need to just be adapted to your population. You need to read widely in the area. What have other researchers found? Who are the movers and shakers? What are key issues and crucial questions? What you'll oftentimes find is once you get into a specific topic or a specific population, is you're going to find researchers who publish over and over again, and these are the experts in the field. And you're going to see some trends and you're going to see some themes. What are the key issues? What are the crucial questions? And you're going to see these repeated throughout good research studies on that topic. It'll help you improve a study's methodology. You may have in your mind how you want to conduct this particular study. However, in reading other researchers' studies, you may see some limitations and some strengths in what you're wanting to do, and you may need to adjust what you're doing. You may find another researcher's methodology to be suited exactly to what you're needing, and therefore you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can use what they've done, and it assists in identifying opposing views. That should be opposing views. There's nothing has 100% agreement in the literature, and so we need to understand all the views around it.